Thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm your host, Daniel Davis. Yes, we're moving out of spring, but what is it about winter that always leaves us feeling like it's the dark times? For a lot of people, it's a lot of depression, but how come some others find really great winter sports and a lot of fun and anticipate the winter coming along? Well, let's explore that with our guest today, Laura Sweeney, who's going to talk with us about what winter is and what we can do about it while we're experiencing it. Laura Sweeney, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today.
It's always a pleasure to be with you, Daniel. Thanks for the invitation.
You bet. Now, I know one of the first questions that I see here is it's interesting because there are a lot of, there's almost like a whole industry around just this element alone, is that people tend to feel sad or depressed during the winter time. And why is it that people feel that way?
Well, I think that a quality of winter is a quality of introspection. That's one of the things that happens during the winter. That's one of the functions of winter. It's the drawing back in of energies that have been focused out in other parts of the year. As you experience the cycle of a year, you have, of course, the bursting forth of spring and then the climax of all that energy in summer. Then in fall, you see things coming to fruition, that energy starts to retreat, and what's been created is available to harvest. And then comes winter. And winter is a time in nature where things rest, where there isn't so much energy. And in our American culture, we have a hard time with the idea of rest, and with the idea that forward momentum isn't always available or isn't even appropriate at certain times. We as a culture, I believe, are uncomfortable with that drawing in. And so some people will actually register it as depression, as lethargy, as boredom, when it is, in fact, a wonderful drawing down and drawing in of focus. And it can be used as a tool for that sort of inner self-reflection and self-rejuvenation.
You know, the Bears had it right. I always thought about that even as a kid. I thought, that sounds so neat. They go crawl into a cave and they sleep for the next couple of months. I mean, what else? And that almost sounds, kind of nice, a little campfire going on there. And I know that when I used to work in the late evenings years ago when I was a bartender, is that I actually looked forward to the winter because when I would get home at, say, 3:30, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, I would be up for a while and watch TV, and I enjoyed the fact that the sun wouldn't even come up until close to 7 o'clock. So I had, an extended night. And then, of course, as the spring and the summer came around, then it was 5:30 and 6 in the morning. I'm like, oh man, I wish winter was still here. So I was probably just the opposite of a lot of people, but mainly just due to my lifestyle that I like that extended night. And I think a lot of people do really enjoy that.
Well, that's true. There are definitely people who have rhythms. I mean, nobody's the same as anybody else.
Sure.
Some people really do enjoy that darkness. And it's lovely because those are the kind of folks that we can turn to if, say, I have a problem with darkness. Well, then I can turn to my friend who really digs darkness, and they are full of, they're full of the wonder of that and the joy of that and their own personal energy around that. And I can use that relationship to help me learn something about myself and also to help get me through what is a difficult time for me. Mm-hmm. And that's certainly one of the qualities of winter, because people aren't out and active as much. There's more time for relationship and building relationships. Traditionally people would play music together. They would sit around the fire and cook. They would tell stories. Native peoples, there are certain stories that are only told at certain times of the year. You have to have the dark to tell certain stories that you need to tell in order to help the year progress. So, even though it might be uncomfortable because it's not as easy. Truly, winter is a hard time for us human beings. It doesn't have the same kind of smooth, full force of energy. It's grueling. And even in our modern life, it can be grueling for different reasons. But make no mistake, it is not an easy time.
I know when you think of Alaska, for instance, and going up north and how they have 24 hours of daylight and then seasons of 24 hours of darkness, at first that sounds inviting, but then it's like, but how long can you actually really tolerate something like that? You really need change.
Yeah, indeed.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's fascinating to talk about the difficulty of winter, because as you're saying, bears hibernate traditionally in the wintertime, and the reason that they hibernate is because it's too difficult to be up and keeping that amount of body mass going during a time of year where it's colder. And what you'll notice is when the temperatures are not as cold, with global climate change, they've discovered that there are certain areas where the temperatures don't drop the way they used to. And so the bears don't hibernate. It's not as hard as it was before. So their bodies don't need to shut down in the same way. But one of the things that I love to think about, because winter is hard, it gives me an opportunity to exercise my faith. It makes me exercise hope. And those are not things I necessarily think about during the summer and the spring when everything's easy and it's fun.
Mm-hmm.
And, things are going on and happening. When things slow down and there's a time of questioning, you can have any religious tradition or no religious tradition at all, but I'm sure each of us has had that experience of waking up in the dark and going to sleep in the dark and feeling like, oh my God, when will the light come back? It's never going to come back. And you just have to say to yourself, it's coming. It's coming. I know it's coming. It's been here before. It's going to come back. And you exercise that muscle of faith and hope, and then it gets rewarded when spring does come. So I really, that's another thing I treasure about winter, is it allows me to exercise that muscle. So when I need to use it at other times of the year, it's got some life in it. It's got some energy in it because I've used it.
Now, earlier in the program, Laura, you were talking about how in the United States, winter is kind of one of them burdensome things because we tend to be a society that likes to be active. We're always setting and trying to achieve goals. We're micromanaging our time, always on the go, always got something to do, busy, busy, busy. But what is it like for other cultures around the world when it comes to winter and how they view winter and experience it themselves?
That's a great question. One of the things that I love discovering is how other cultures do things differently than we do. In fact, the Celtic culture, they view winter as the beginning of the year. Mm-hmm. And it's not spring. It's actually winter. So midnight is the start of their next day. And I love that because it has a quality of expectancy to it, mm-hmm. and an unknownness that it comes in mystery. Each day starts in a mysterious way. And I notice that there are other cultures that really value that mystery. Some of the native cultures will break down cycles of human beings' lives and relate them to the cycles of the year. And they have this lovely tradition of talking about ages and relating it to time. They'll talk about young people as the time that has a beginning and an end. And they'll talk about, mothers, the mother time, younger than a kid but not as old as a an older person, as the time of friendship that has a beginning but no end. And then as you get older, you become, a healer or a warrior. That's a time that has an end but no beginning. But when you get to winter of the year, it's the time of the elder, the time of the shaman, and it is a quality that has no beginning and no end. And I love the mystery of that, the all-encompassing nature of that. It's such a lovely way to look at it. And that quality of mystery, of not knowing, is something very different from our Western culture. We like to know what's happening. We like to be able to control and influence what's happening. And to be able to influence things, you most certainly need to understand them. And the idea that you can't really even understand something, you just have to trust that it is what it is, and it will work the way it does, is such a great tool for me.
I can believe that. I was just thinking, too, that, during the course of winter, it seems, as you were saying earlier, there's a certain lethargy. You're just kind of feeling relaxed, maybe not as energetic. What do you think that is? Is it because of the lack of light, or what do you think it is exactly?
I think it has to do, with the temperature change, lower temperature, certainly. It has to do with the quality of light, the strength of the light. Obviously, since we are farther away from the sun, the quality of the light is different as well. And you'll see it in nature. But what it's doing is not perhaps what you'd expect. When you look at plants in the natural world and you see them go dormant, you think they've died. But that's not what's happening. In fact, most plants start getting very active in their root growth in the winter season because the soil is still relatively warm unless you're, way up north. And they are taking that time to pull the energy that they've been using out where the air has been warm, pulling it down into where the soil is warm, and reinforcing their foundations, re-engaging with the earth. That's one of the things that I like to remind myself is available to me during the winter time, because I'm feeling slower, I'm not as active, I'm maybe gaining a little bit of weight, and I'm being around other people more because I'm not out and about doing my own thing and moving so fast. I'm with other people. We've all slowed down together. And it gives me the opportunity to re-examine my foundations with my relationships, re-examining how my family works for me and how my intimate relationships work for me, and spending some quiet time thinking about what's that about? How does that work? And that's all internal stuff. That's all has to do with our perception. And so it's a perfect time of year to be thoughtful about those internal issues. That's what our energy encourages us to do. And no matter where we come to, whether we find that we want to change things or we wish they were different, having taken the time to think about it sets us up for being able to use the incoming flux of energy in the spring to bring those contemplations into action. It's just such a beautiful flow that I encourage people to allow that flow to work with us instead of against us. Don't get depressed if things aren't working the way you want them to. Trust and have faith that burst of spring energy will move you forward into the way you've thought about as being the best way for you now.
I find it interesting, especially for people, like I was saying earlier, that they've kind of made an industry out of the, I guess, call it the effects of what winter does to people. And They've even created the acronym SAD, I believe it's called.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, okay, is there really any truth to that, or is that something that someone just made up in order to sell a product? Because I watched my mother going through this, and all of a sudden one year, and this was probably about 15 years ago, I'm guessing, and she says, well, in the wintertime I have SAD, you might want to watch out because you might get it too because you need sunlight and it'll cause depression, this and that and the other. And quite frankly, it never really occurred to me. I mean, my problem with winter, if I have one, is that I don't like it to be cold and wet. It can be cold, it can be wet, but I don't like it to be cold and wet, and that's really about it. But as I was describing earlier, I liked the longer nights, as far as that goes, being a night person. But here she is. I remember going to visit her one time, and she's got this light sitting next to her that's pouring out probably more energy than a lighthouse does. Now, what's with this? She says it's to help my SAD condition. I said, but who told you had that? And that's what I wondered about, if this was something that just somebody made up, to sell a product.
Well, I believe that is true. It's the seasonal affective disorder. They can quantify it. Mm-hmm. They can say that there are people who actually produce less serotonin in the wintertime, significantly less than most of us. But I like to think about that as somebody who really has, who can really do winter. They can get into winter in ways that only, a few of us can dream of. They can really feel that. I personally think of them as a resource. My husband, my former husband, has that SADS, and I look to him in the wintertime to remind me of that contemplative frame of mind. In other cultures, they would view people who have an affinity for a season as an expert in that season, as a resource, as a valuable member of the community, because they have a knowing that not everybody has. And so we tend to medicalize differences in Western culture, and to a certain extent, I agree with you that it's about selling something. Mm-hmm. But I believe there is a difference, and I think it's a difference that we can celebrate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, winter certainly can leave people feeling like they're the last ones at a party, that's for sure. Now, here's really something interesting that we've brought on the program many different times when we talk about nutrition, more or less bringing back the common sense that has seemingly been lost in that area out there as far as how it's addressed. But there are particular foods that you should eat during the seasons that they grow most in. There's a good reason for that. Talk about what some of those foods in the wintertime could be and how they could probably actually help people through the winter months.
Yeah, oh my. Well, there is a lot in our culture about foods that you eat in the wintertime, and I think people probably don't really think about it this way. But root vegetables, if we're going to talk about eating seasonally and eating in a responsible locavore kind of way, mm-hmm. Your root vegetables are definitely a wonderful way to go, and they are so good in soups and in stews, and most of them have to be heated to get all the nutrition out of it. Some of them you can eat raw, but I think it's interesting that those root vegetables are the ones that you have to apply heat to. So once again, you're, as a human being around heat, getting warm while you're eating something that is specific to the season. So you've got roast root vegetables and all the wonderful spices that can go along with those. And there's the question of spices. Gingerbread. You think about the things that you have during the Christmas holidays, or they're spicy. They have ginger in them. Ginger actually is an energetic herb that helps you to keep your energy up in a time when naturally your energy would be down a little bit. You have all those great aromatic herbs that are warming yourself internally. The Ayurvedic folks from India certainly knew about that, and would use those internal herbs as a warming mechanism. Spiced ciders and hot mulled wines and things like that. There's a reason why we turn to all that yummy, good, spicy, aromatic stuff in the wintertime. So if people can recognize that and even add more of that to their own diet, then they can really be in sync with the concentration of winter in the way that they eat, as well as, you know, how they see the world. And boy, I tell you, there's just nothing more satisfying to me than spending time cooking a nice soup or some polenta in front of the stove and being able to heat up the house with good smells, and I get the warmth of standing next to the stove, and then I'm coming up with something that's really been cooked from my heart, and I can give that to my family and know that I am in it for them in so many different ways.
I had a really nice image. I don't know if you're familiar with the Celestial Seasonings teas, but on the box, on the back, what they have a drawing, if you will, of is a bear with a blanket over its lap, sitting in a really nice, comfortable chair in front of a fire. And I thought, that's winter right there.
Oh, yeah.
I'll sit and I'll contemplate all day long, just like that, boy, throwing that log in that fire. And I actually have, as I have a wood stove, and I mean, there were just, again, I can't say enough of how enjoyable I liked winter, especially being able to sit by, you know, the wood stove, the door open, the fire going, seeing all the different colors that you see from that. And there is a tremendous a lot of reflection and contemplation that you actually experience in those long winter nights that is, to me, very enjoyable.
Oh, that's so true. And it's interesting. If you look at many different traditions will have what they call the Wheel of the Year, where they recognize the cyclic nature of seasons, of human lives, of life on the planet. And in many different traditions, you have winter at one end of the circle. In a pagan tradition, it's at the north end of the circle. A lot of pagan folks were from the northern hemisphere, so the coldness is in the north. There are elements that go along with that placement, stone and ice, and directly opposite that, oddly enough, on the wheel is the south, which is the element of fire. And I don't think it's coincidental that human beings are fascinated with fire as the complement to cold. Mm-hmm. I love that you bring that up because I think that's right on.
Mm-hmm. Well, also, too, when you take a look at burning wood, and again, when you get really nice wood from nature, it's been well seasoned, there are just a lot of interesting, tremendous colors that can actually come from a fire log. And you realize, or at least for me, it was sort of like a light went on that this is giving me back the sunlight that was given to it. So it's literally like a mini sun that's sitting within your fireplace.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. If you look at what wood is, it is a mechanism for storing carbon. From a permaculture perspective, which is a particular kind of gardening or land care practice that talks about cycles and relationships in nature, what a tree is a mechanism for storing carbon, for storing sunlight. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons why you hear a lot nowadays when it comes to global warming about carbon sequestration and planting trees, because trees will hold that carbon and then release it. So yes, it is very much like enjoying the sun in a different form. And don't you notice that when you're watching those flames and those colors, that you get a dreamscape that opens up for you. There are stories that come to you, and thoughts And when you let go of your mind like that, your conscious mind, and you allow your unconscious or your subconscious mind to come out and play, so there's so much richness there. I know that great inventors, Einstein and Alexander Graham Bell, and so many of them will talk about how they've had their most stunning recognitions when they were doing something else, when they were daydreaming, when they were just letting their mind go. And so that's another one of those unintended benefits of taking the time to allow yourself to dream, to allow yourself to float. And that, in fact, you can come up with some really good stuff that way.
Yeah, I would imagine you could. I know exactly what you're talking about, is the idea that we finally reduce our mind from being engaged in so much activity to just being engaged in relaxing, and that's when it gets to open up and actually share a lot of ideas. And I would think that winter is also a great time for problem solving as well, because you take that moment to do exactly what you're talking about, which is to sort of still the mind, if you will, and then let it come out on its own.
Yes, there are two mechanisms that work really well for winter being a time to do that. The first is just what you said, recognizing that there's a stillness inherent in us, in our energetic selves, and allowing ourselves to be influenced by that, to calm down and think about foundational issues. And then the other cool mechanism that we have is, because we're around other people, because there's parties and there's gatherings, and we find ourselves drawn to being with other people, then we have the opportunity to engage with them and check out our perceptions, our newfound observations with other people. We don't have to do it in a vacuum. We actually have the opportunity, it's presented to us on a platter, of checking that stuff out with other folks. Mm-hmm. And it's perfect. It's such a synchrony, because not only do you get the chance to deepen your relationship with them, and they get to deepen their relationship with you by having the conversation, but you actually get a chance to get some feedback about what your inside looks like on the outside. By asking people, how is this for you? How does this sound for you? Am I totally off base here? What, have you thought about this? And how does that work for you? It's just a beautiful, sweet way that you can build so many things all at one time, if you let it work for you.
If you let it work for you, exactly. Quit being so nasty during the winter time. Lighten up. Laura, what do you consider to be your favorite thing about winter?
Oh, see, I'm one of those people who can never pick a favorite. There's so many things that I like. It's hard to pick a favorite, but
for me, it was the idea that night is a little longer. So,
well, I think as I've come to age, I become more and more comfortable with the idea of mystery. It's taken me some time to actually not be afraid of that, to welcome it. And it's taken knowing people who are in the winters of their lives, my grandma, some of the elders in my community, seeing them, watching how what I used to consider a loss is not. It's a gaining of something else. And so I really like winter because it reminds me not to be afraid of what I don't know. And to know that there is something after what I don't know. There is always a spring after the winter. I may not know what that spring's going to be, but I know it's going to be there. I love being reminded of that.
It's as if all things are always in motion, just at different paces.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess if I had to pick a favorite, I really like the gingerbread too.
There you go. Warming our hearts and hearths, that's for
Absolutely.
sure. It's just like in the movie Groundhog Day, which I had just seen last night again. And and it's just so interesting at how people adapt to winter, especially, and even how they celebrate it. So it should be, it's a season that just comes for a few months and then we're on to something else. But again, I kind of like the idea of the lethargic state that nature can produce. And, especially in our busy lives, our so-called busy lives, we really need something that will slow us down, because I just think that that's so beneficial for us, especially not just for our health, but spiritually speaking.
Yes, yes. And so I encourage people not to allow that slowing down to feel like a waste or to feel like a loss or to bring more tension. There are so many people that I know that get wound up in the wintertime because of those ideas of depression and anxiety and boredom and fear. But if you can relax and allow those things to really allow those things to come in, then what you discover is that they are refreshing, and you have even more that comes out of that winter and into the spring.
It's too bad Jack Nicholson didn't hear this conversation before staying at the Overlook. Movie The Shining. Boy, he really flipped out. I don't want to experience. Is that what it's going to do to me? No, I'm staying down in Florida, I'm telling you.
That's a bad winter experience. No.
Exactly. Especially having such an upbeat wife trying to make each day bright and say, he's like, I ain't having it. I'm miserable.
Well, if I was forced into that kind of merriment all the time during the winter, I might snap. Who knows?
Well, Laura Sweeney, it's been a pleasure to have you on the program today. You wouldn't think that, talking about winter could be really interesting, but it really truly is. I mean, just even if you get an opportunity to watch any kind of, nature documentaries, for instance, and you see how animals adapt and how some of them actually thrive during the winter, it's quite phenomenal to realize the real magic that's out there. And it's been a pleasure it's been a real pleasure to have you on the program. I was thinking, winter, what are we talking about winter for? But, as always, it becomes a magical conversation.
Indeed. Well, thank you once again. It's always a delight to talk with you.
You bet. Again, Laura Sweeney, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today, even though winter is almost done. Thank you again. I want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You've been listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. Be sure to visit us at our website, beyond50radio.com. That's right, we play all year long, even in the winter, and that's beyond50radio.com, the number 50 with a 50, and sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter where all of this great information and shows, you name it, it's all there, and it's all for the taking. Again, thank you for tuning in. I'm Daniel Davis. This has been the Beyond 50 radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.